Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, today we're going to go dive into a topic that is more important than ever, Wi-Fi security. Whether you're setting up a home network, managing a small business, or running an enterprise network, securing your Wi-Fi is crucial. Why? Because your data deserves it. Be safe from the prying eyes and the cybersecurity threats. In this video, we'll break down the Wi-Fi security in a way that is easy to understand using some real-world examples and practical tips. We'll cover everything from the basics of data privacy, AAA, to advanced topics like WPA3 and the four-way handshake. Plus, I'll share some common pitfalls and how to avoid them. So grab a cup of coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's make your Wi-Fi network bulletproof together. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of Wi-Fi security and will be well equipped to protect your network from the potential threats that are out there today. So let's get going. We'll explore the WLAN security, compare it to the wired security, and see how we protect our data over the airwaves. Now, this is usually a very common concept to compare wireless versus wired, because one of the reasons why wireless initially did not get adopted was because people thought it was not as secure. But honestly, if done right, it is today more secure than wired, in my opinion. Unlike wired networks, wireless signals obviously can propagate in many directions, making them susceptible to eavesdropping. If somebody is in my parking lot, they can obviously see what my SSID. They can try hacking it. So this difference requires a unique security measures to ensure our wireless networks are secure as their wired counterparts. Data privacy. It's all about protecting our data from unauthorized access. We can achieve this through encryption using algorithms like RC4, which is not used too much, but these days people are going to AES. That's what's preferred to keep our information safe. So simply think that if I'm going to cross a packet from one end to another, there could be somebody in the middle who could be looking at that packet and try to understand what has been sent. If I have a way of encrypting that data, that if somebody even looks at it, for that person, that packet looks gibberish, that's the whole goal. And obviously, because the data is transmitted freely in an open air, proper protection is needed to ensure that data privacy is there. So strong encryption will be needed. Now, if you look through this, a cipher is like an algorithm that is used to perform this encryption. The goal of cryptography is to take that piece of information which is to be transmitted, called as plain text, and using a process on an algorithm which is referred to as key or a cipher, and transform that plain text into some sort of encrypted text which is gibberish, also known as ciphertext. AAA standard is for authentication, authorization, and accounting. It's a framework that is basically trying to answer three questions. Who are you? What can you do? And what did you do? This helps managing access and usage of network resources. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, authentication is pretty simple and straightforward to understand. That I'm going to try and get you access to a certain thing, like a server. Authorization means what are you allowed to do on that server. Now, let's say if I was working for a bank, if somebody walks up to me and I was a teller, I'm logging in with my credentials that the bank has given me as an employee. So I'm authenticating into that system. I'm authorized to make certain transactions, but if a transaction is suppose above a certain threshold, which means, okay, 5 grand, let's say, I need to go to my manager to get an approval. So my authorization is only up to like that amount, but my manager is higher. Accounting means, okay, if I am allowed to make the changes up to that certain amount, but what did I do? Because tomorrow if I made an error, there has to be a way to go back and check. Maybe to check that if I'm not transferring money into my own account or my friend's account. That's accounting. When we talk about legacy 8.11 security, which is originally when it all started, looking at this, open system seems like, oh, this is not safe, and shared key looks safe. But honestly, open systems were actually more safe than the shared key. Shared key was the web, which was the security that was used at that time, which was obviously not secure. As you see in this slide, the legacy systems relied on methods like open system and shared key authentication. Now, static web, MAC filters, SSID, cloaking. MAC filters means only a certain MAC filter is allowed. But then we all know that spoofing a MAC address is not a big deal. Another one would be hide my SSID so nobody can see me. But you have to understand that is also not a secure method, because when a person tries to connect to a system or a network, it gets exposed. So I will see, so if I'm a passive attacker, I will just wait for somebody to try and connect to a network so I can uncover that SSID. Or I can see that somebody's connected, I can try and deauth them, which means de-authenticate them. In the previous videos, we've talked about the WLAN state machine. That is what I'm talking at this point. And once it's de-authenticated, I'm going to try and connect again. I'm trying to connect, so again, that SSID gets seen. So that's the idea behind it. Now, as I said before, shared key authentication might seem to be more secure as compared to an open system authentication. In reality, shared key could be bigger security risk. During the shared key authentication process, anybody who captures the clear text challenge and then captures the encrypted challenge phrase in the response, they could potentially drive the static web key that you're using. And if the static web key is compromised, a whole new can of worms will be opened. I don't want to get into web here because honestly, it's been broken into multiple pieces. There are a whole bunch of videos online, people talking about how can you hack web. That's the reason why today we don't even have that security method being used anymore. Okay, so it's been deprecated and no longer recommended. Now, static web aim to provide basically confidentiality, access control, and data integrity. However, its vulnerable, as we spoke about already, have made it easily less effective in modern wireless security. Using a shared key, a shared secret key that is configured in a wireless client and an AP, you have a few options where you can use a 64 or 128-bit length, and it uses a random generated IV, which is a 24-bit, which was the main reason of its demise. So as I said, 64-bit and 128-bit options uses a 24-bit IV. Now, because it uses this IV, which is the initialized vector for encryption, unfortunately, the limited length of IV made the web much susceptible to attacks. Now, weak IV, which reveals information about web key, once you collect a large number of weak IVs, you can basically pretty much crack the web key now. Some of the other security measures we spoke about very high level. I spoke about MAC filters, SSID cloaking. Now, MAC filters and SSID cloaking, both of them are definitely not security if you're talking about them individually, right? Because let's say if I was at an airport and I bought airtime to use the airport Wi-Fi, which is not free. I'm talking about the past now. Obviously, most places do give it for free though. But let's say if it's not free, and the only way they were authenticating was using a MAC filter. So people see that what's the MAC filter that a person is connected. Now I can go ahead and disconnect that person via deauth, try to spoof his MAC and then connect. So now the system thinks that I am that person who paid, whereas I am not the person. So it's not very secure. So is the SSID cloaking. Now they're not good enough, but I could have them as a layered approach. If I have a door which is not locked, so obviously it's not a very secure way, but it's still better than an open door. A closed door is still better than an open door, but it's not security. But then if I can use it as a layered approach, now I can have a closed door, now I can put a lock on it, I put a chain on it. So I'm gonna try and add more stuff to it to make it more secure. So it's the layered approach that I'm looking at. That makes it more secure. And you have to be very practical and think about it. If a hacker or a person who's trying to get into your system, if you make it that much harder that it's not worth their time, then you're safe. There is no bulletproof system today, to be honest with you. It's almost like a cat and mouse where you leave something open and then you get compromised. But if you've put enough stuff in front of a person to not make it worthwhile going after you, then you're safe. Now, WPA itself, which is WPA1 in some cases it's called, was an interim solution to address the web vulnerabilities that we spoke about. It extended the IV length and introduced something called as a MIC, which is Message Integrity Check, making it more secure. The big difference between here was you did not need a hardware upgrade. That's why it was an interim solution, because think about it. If I have a hardware, I want to make sure that I want to make my wireless system more secure. And I'm not going to just suddenly go ahead and buy all the hardware new. So if I'm a warehouse, I'm not going to buy new scanner guns just because now web is broken. In the meantime, till I can buy myself some time, in my next refresh cycle I can look for a better hardware that supports better protection. For now, let's use WPA/TKIP, which was used. In the latest standard, just to give you a heads up, that's also deprecated. The reason also it is deprecated is because the solution vulnerability, also there is a restriction that if you're ever using TKIP, the maximum speed you can get to is 54 megabits per second. So something to keep in mind. And then Robust Security Network, RSN, which was defined in 802.11 back in 2012, uses something called as a four-way handshake. Okay. Now this is how basically you use to generate your keys. And this was part of the WPA2 protocol that came up. Now PSK authentication, also known as pre-shared key, this is something what most of us use at our homes. It's commonly known as WPA or WPA2 passphrase and widely used in homes and small offices. Some of the enterprises are also using it because certain devices can only support that. For example, an IoT device won't support a certificate, which is way more secure, but I have to use WPA2 passphrase in that case. Now in a PSK authentication, clients are configured with a static passphrase. I can have a password for my wireless, which then converts into something called as pairwise master key or PMK for secure communication. And using that PMK, basically you drive the four-way handshake, you go for the four-way handshake, and you drive the PTKs, which is the session keys for every time. Okay, now there is a process which you're going to talk about here, but the main thing to remember is the passphrase that you use actually creates your PMK, which is the pairwise master key, which is also a reason why this becomes vulnerable, because if somebody does a packet capture of my network and he or she is able to capture my four-way handshake, they can take that capture home, do a brute force attack, try different attempts of what password I could have possibly used. These days there's no limit to it because they have cloud to their disposal. I can have rainbow tables run through different combinations, admin 123, what's the password, and if you have a common one, it will get cracked much easier. And then once it's cracked, then they can decrypt all the packets that were captured at that time, and they can go and see what was there in open text. Now, this is also a problem if you think about it, is because there are some vendors who are able to use a solution where I can have a PSK, but I can have a different PSK for everybody on the same kind of SSID. Now, this is helpful. Think about it for a minute. If I was using PSK in my corporation, and if I had to let somebody go, I have to change the whole password for each person again, and everybody has to re-authenticate with a new password. So it could be a bit of a nightmare trying to manage the password. So it's a management nightmare from that perspective. So when you have a different password for everybody, when that person is gone, that doesn't affect the others. So it makes much more sense to have some of these solutions in place. But still remember, WPA2-Personal is a weak authentication method, which is vulnerable to brute force offline dictionary attacks. Okay. When we talk about why would somebody still use it if we're talking it's weak, is because it basically is used by some of the legacy devices, BYOD, because I don't know what am I expecting when BYOD comes on, guest access or IoT devices, as I mentioned before, right? This is something to keep in mind. If you want to have it a strong authentication, that's where your certifications comes in. So you can replace your PSK authentication with 802.1X or EAP. Okay. Again, there are a few flavors of EAP as well, that protocol that we have. I'm not going to go into details of them, but there are a few options where I can use TLS or TTLS. Those are a few options. But again, there is a cost attached to it because you will be having to use certificates and install those certificates on your server. Now, do you want the certificates only on the server side, or you're also going to go ahead and use on the client side as well? So it depends on how secure you want to be, what's your budget you're working with. Security is also tied to budgets, obviously, right? If you ask somebody how secure you want to be, I want to be really secure. Now, at my house, obviously I care about my security. I want to be as secure as I can. But there's only so far I'll go. I'm not going to start putting gunmen outside my house or have, some sort of a castle wall or something like that, right? So you have to understand that what you're trying to protect, what's your budget you're going to work with, and then what are my options with that. And then you have something called as SAE, which is simultaneous authentication of equals. This is part of a WPA3 security certification, and it aims to prevent dictionary attacks, which we spoke about before. It enhances security by allowing only one guess of the passphrase and being resistant of forging a replay attack, which really means is if a passphrase is compromised, it cannot be used to recreate any previously generated PMKs, which means, okay, I did the packet capture, I go home now, and I try to use a dictionary attack, and I can go back and recreate or decrypt all those packets. That's not going to happen. So that is why it is much, much better than WPA2. We haven't seen a lot of adoption yet with WPA3, but definitely the enterprises are going that direction. Not so for small businesses or homeowners, but definitely that would be something that would be coming. Because you also have to understand that if you want to go with Wi-Fi 6, WPA3 is part of that certification. And if you want to go with Wi-Fi 6E, there is a mandatory that you will have to go WPA3. There is no choice. If I use the 6 GHz band, I will have to go WPA3. So the main thing to remember is the SAE does not use the passwords as the keying method to drive those keys. That's why it's forward secrecy. Okay, this is just showing you what frames go back and forth. So there are some SAE authentication methods that go back and forth, and you see the 4-way handshake at the end to generate those PTK keys. But the key thing is to remember here is the passphrase did not get used to generate the PMK in this case. Okay, now let's go on to 1X or EAP framework, which is basically 3 things: supplicant, authenticator, and authentication server. Now, supplicant is the client or the end device seeking the network access who wants to get in there, who's providing the credentials for authentication. Okay. Authenticator acts as a doorkeeper who's facilitating that authentication process and deciding whether should I let you in or no. You also have the authenticator and the authentication server. Server could be your AD. So if I'm logging in with my credentials at my work, the device that's going to say yes or no could be the wireless controller or the switch in this case, but it's going back to the server to AD to see, okay, do you know this guy? So if I'm John, do you know John, by the way? Yeah, I know John, let him in. So then the authenticator lets you in. They all work together, hand to hand. Together, the supplicant, authenticator, and the authentication server form a robust network for secure network access. This is just showing you that if I have a wireless controller, in this case here, and if I don't have a wireless controller, I only have an AP, then the AP is basically the authenticator. So for example, if this client is trying to connect, the AP in this case, because I don't have a wireless controller, he is going to be the authenticator. He's not just the pass-based guy. So he goes to the radius server saying, this is John, should I let him in? He says yes or no. Based on that, the AP lets him in. The only difference with the wireless controller is AP in this case is just going to pass that packet to the WLAN controller, who's going to say yes or no. And the controller goes to the radius server, says, do you know John? Yes, no. Based on that, you're in or out. That's the only difference. Now this is just same process showing the Cisco ICE solution, which is the supplicant, the Cisco AP, which is creating a CAP web tunnel back to the controller, and the radius is being run with a NAC service. For Cisco is ICE, which is Identity Service Engine, and what goes back and forth. Okay. Now then the 4-way handshake, that is still there, because the 4-way handshake basically creates 2 of those keys, which are the GMK and the PMK. These are the keys that are, and the finally encryption is for the PTK and the GTK. Now PTK is basically used to create for that particular session for unicast frames, whereas the GTK are used for any multicast frames. Okay. Now this is just showing you how this all works. Initially, I know the PMK, I know the password, It generates something called as supplicant nonce, which is a randomly generated number. And then it has to send it across. The only thing that is missing, see, these are the things that I need basically, okay, on everywhere. Obviously both the sides at this point know the PMK. AP knows the A nonce because that's going to be his number. S nonce is known by the supplicant, and then you have the authenticator, authentication MAC and the supplication MAC, right? Only thing that is not known to me in this case is the authenticator nonce at this point. So when I send it across, the first message comes from the AP. He says, okay, here's my A nonce. Now I have everything. So I've derived the PTK at this point, but there are some other keys under it, which is not in scope of this video because then I'll be going very deep. Those keys are used to secure it, and you send it back with S nonce. At this point, both of them have derived the PTK. And then once it has the PTK, this will generate the GTK, which is for driving a key that is used to secure the multicast packets. Again, PTK was for unicast, GTK is for multicast. And at the end of the four-way handshake, the point to remember is they both have installed the PTK and GTK. If you have sending unicast or you're sending the multicast packets, I can make sure that both are encrypted. This is just a block diagram of the exact same thing we spoke about. Okay. If you're using WPA and WPA2-Personal, it offers a simple method, right? Because I'm just using a PSK. It can use advanced encryption standard, which is AES. And this is where using 802.11i, which is mainly around security, which is the RSN, right? And the protocol it can use is the CCMP. So simply I can use a PSK, simple password, but then it will do a four-way handshake to create a key which has some vulnerability, but relatively it's still secure. Okay. Thing to remember here is it is what you're trying to protect. See, in wireless we have three frames that we have spoken about before, right? The main frames that we're trying to protect is the data frame. We're not going to try and protect the management and control frames. That is the reason why deauth could happen, that somebody could just knock my network. That is why there was a 802.11w, which was meant for management frame protection. Now, if you're using WPA3, that is already part of that, which means your management frames will be protected. Now, think about this. If I was teaching in a class and suddenly if somebody logs in, it was a Zoom class and that person logs in and says, okay, the class is over, and everybody drops. There has to be a way for students to know that if it's me who's dismissing the class or no. That is what your management protection frame looks like. Okay. WPA3 offers several advantages, including enhanced security features. As I said, removal of some legacy protocols. It's saying old stuff we're not gonna support anymore. It's part of the Wi-Fi 6 certification, ensuring the modern secure wireless communication, right? So I won't go through everything, but you can see it on the slide. What are some of the things that just came up with it? It has different modes. It comes in two flavors, WPA2-Personal and Enterprise, each tailored with some different environments and security needs. If you're trying to go with Personal, which means kind of password, Enterprise, which would really mean 802.1X, where I'm using certificates at that point. You could use a transition mode as well. Now, transition mode means if you have somebody who can not speak the language and then it's almost, think of this as I am trying to have different signs on the street which are in English and French. If I speak French, I can look at the French signs. If I speak English, then I can look at the English. Keep in mind, what's been seen in the field is a lot of these clients are notorious. When you put these two signs, they're like, I can speak English, yes, but just because there was a French, I'm confused, so I'm not going to do it. Which is one of the things that I have seen people run into. Enhance Open, very important. Not really part of WPA3, but is an amendment that came around, which uses OWE protocol to provide encryption for open networks, ensuring the data privacy even on public Wi-Fi, which means if there's an open SSID, and if you're using Open Enhance or Enhance Open, you could actually still be encrypted to make sure that whatever you're sending outside in the air, you will still have some sort of encryption in place. Then we go on to traffic segmentation. Now, there are different ways you can do it. Traffic segmentation involves, VLANs to separate different types of traffic, such as guest voice data, which means I could also use 3 different SSIDs, call them guest, voice, and data, As we all know, when we do that, what also happens is I put extra beacons on the air. Now, if I'm putting extra beacons, I'm putting extra management frames that are going to be not data at this point. So I'm going to somehow create too many SSIDs, which could affect my network performance. That's where role-based access control comes into the rescue. What you can do is, so let's say if I had a SSID called as corporate, when I log in and I put my credentials, based on who I am and what device am I on, I would be getting different access. Could be put into a different VLANs. This is something used by using NACs at the back of it. Okay. Now, this is looking at if I can have different SSIDs, I can tie those SSIDs to different VLANs. But if I'm using role-based access, I can still go ahead and create different VLANs based on the role that I get. As I was giving you example before, if I was going on my laptop, maybe I'll get a VLAN 5. But if I was trying to go on my phone, I might not get VLAN 5, which gives me access to some of my corporate stuff, but gives me VLAN 8, say for example, in this case. This is something that you can keep in mind, okay? SSIDs, just so that you know, I can go up to 16, but it's a bad idea. General recommendation is not more than 3. So this is just showing you that example, role-based access control, which is just showing you that how I can restrict an access based on which device am I on. Okay, so VLAN role is, okay, you're going to be getting VLAN 10 firewall policy where your bandwidth is unlimited. In certain case, then I can also cap my bandwidth based on what that person is up to, right? Then we move on to infrastructure security, which really involves securing physical and interface aspect of a network, preventing unauthorized access to and tampering. So why do I have my switches in a closet and IT room that is locked? Because I don't want people to go in and start getting access to my stuff. Same thing is for interface security, right? Because what if there was an AP that was an outdoor AP, or there was an AP that was on my reception? What if somebody goes onto the ladder, removes that AP, takes that Ethernet cable that was plugged into the AP and plugs into his or her laptop? What kind of access do they get? So that is how I'm going to make sure that I protect my interface as well, the security of the physical security of the devices. Okay. Guest WLAN security, what kind of options do I have? And I can have a separate SSID for guests. I can put them on a separate VLAN. I can have a certain policy that what can you access, or you can access nothing except the internet. And then I can have a captive portal, which really means is I'm going to have some terms and conditions where I can also have a disclaimer to protect myself as a company. And then you can have some sort of guest management solution as well. Okay, where I can go on, I can ask for access, put somebody's email address to get access, and then once that person authorizes me, only then I'll get onto the guests. This is again achieved by some of the NAC solutions that are out there, which is ClearPass, ICE. So this is just captive portal, which really means is if I go to any McDonald's or Tim Hortons, for example, I get a splash page and I accept the terms and conditions and I'm in. That is just basically what a captive portal really means. I hope you got enough out of this. And this was a very high level of WLAN security covered in 20 minutes or so. Thank you.